Hey everyone, Lauren at Mill City Roasters. I wanted to do a video about cupping. Cupping is something that we talk about all the time with our roaster students, with colleagues, with each other. We cup here in our space anywhere between 1 and 5 times a week. Cupping is one of those skills that people don't always associate with sort of being a strong roasting skill, but when you think about it, it's kind of the only tool we have in our toolbox for evaluating the quality of our coffee. We focus a lot on cupping in our roasting classes. All of our classes incorporate cupping in one way or another, and so we wanted to do a quick rundown video of what we use to cup in our space and what are some of the basic tools that you need to cup where you are. Now before we get going, I really just kind of want to talk about, big picture, what is a cupping and why is it important? A cupping is a formal way of evaluating coffee. It's different than just drinking a cup of coffee. It's thoughtful, it's intentional, and it's really a controlled way to look at coffee and really evaluate what's happening for it. Sometimes we're doing a cupping to make a purchasing decision, so we're cupping a pretty light sample roast to decide if it's a coffee that we want to buy, to bring into our inventory, to sell as a retail coffee, or to utilize in a class or for our toll roasting program. Sometimes we're cupping as just part of a QC measure to figure out if a profile is working the way that we want it to. Maybe we are roasting for a customer or for a special project, and we just need some feedback about that roast profile. Sometimes we're cupping as part of our consultation program where roasters want some feedback on their roasts or they want feedback on some of their green coffee to see if that would be a good buy, or they need help designing a profile. All of those instances would require us to go to the cupping table to check out those coffees and see what's going on in the cup. Online and in conversation in the world of roasting, you really see people get quite fixated on what the roast curve looks like, what their ROR numbers are, what their finish time and temperatures are, and everyone kind of has different ideas about what the right numbers are for some of those values or what things should look like or all that kind of stuff. You're going to hear members of our team say again and again and again, what's going on in the cup? How does the coffee taste? That's really all that matters, right? Your customer is not looking at your roast curve. Your customer doesn't really know what your drop temp was. Your customer doesn't know if your ROR was declining at a beautiful sloping pace. Your customer tastes this, what's here in the coffee. If you're a roaster, I feel strongly, and I know that my colleagues agree with me, that cupping should be a part of your process. This should be something that you do at least once or twice a month, ideally every week, to check in with your coffee and see how it's tasting. No one should know your coffee better than you do. If something's changing in your coffee because your greens are getting a little old, they've been in your inventory for a little while, maybe your roaster system is changing, your ventilation hasn't been cleaned in a little bit, or your roast air fan needs a little bit maintenance, those things are going to show up in the cup first and foremost. You may not even notice them in the roast curves and the data logging software. So that's a good reason to be checking in with your coffee all the time. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, Lauren, I taste my coffee every day, right? I brew a pot of it, and I drink it in the morning with my breakfast. I drink it on my way to work. I drink it while I'm working. I drink it from dawn till dusk. I feel that that is not the same as evaluating your coffee. When we're drinking a cup of coffee that we've brewed, we're doing other things. We're not focused on the coffee, we're not paying attention to it, and the cupping is an opportunity to get really scientific and observe what's actually happening with no other distractions. To that end, when I go to the cupping table, I try to eliminate all distractions. I cup in a pretty controlled environment, like a roastery, where I'm not getting a lot of other food smells, any other aromas. We don't have any perfumes or candles or scented air fresheners in here. I try to cup in the morning after I've already had my coffee and some food, but it's been an hour or so since those things have happened. Your cupping shouldn't be your first cup of coffee in the morning. You should never be going to a cupping feeling like you need a little caffeine, partially because we spit out our coffee during a cupping, but also because if you're not alert and well caffeinated, it's going to be hard to pay attention and take good notes. So that's a little bit about the mindset, the environment, and sort of how you should kind of approach a cupping. And now I want to talk about the basic tools that you need to perform a cupping. What's cool about cupping is that it's universally simple. It's one of the most pared down ways to brew coffee and to drink coffee, and it's something that I have participated in at almost every link in the supply chain. From origin to export to import to roaster to cafe, coffee changes hands. And all of those people have an impact, an effect over the quality of that coffee and what's going to happen to it. And at every point of that supply chain, coffee is tasted in the same way. It's cupped just like we're going to cup. Cupping does not require any specific expensive equipment. Probably the biggest investment that you'll make to your cupping toolkit is a good grinder. And everything else is pretty commonplace, things that you might already have on hand in your kitchen or your roastery that you can utilize over and over again. If you are willing to invest a little bit of money and build a really good cupping toolkit, get a lot of cups, a lot of spoons, some nice thermal carafes, a good scale, then cupping will be easier for you because you'll have what you need. It's just like any other hobby or activity. If you don't have the right tools, or if you don't like the tools that you have, you're a lot less likely to practice that thing, right? Think about, getting into a new sport and not buying the piece of equipment. Every time you want to go play that sport, you're sort of struggling to get started. You've got to find a place to rent it, or you're working with something that doesn't quite work right. Cupping's very, very similar. If you have tools and equipment that you like, that you enjoy using, that are tactile or that are beautiful, you're going to go back to the cupping table very frequently because you're going to like doing it. So we're going to start with our cups or our bowls. We're going to link in this video to our cupping supply products, which we sell on our website. And we're going to begin with our cupping bowls. Now, we sell the Barista Hustle cupping bowls. These are sort of an industry standard size. They hold about 200 milliliters of water of 7 ounces. And what we like about them is they're plastic, which means they're super durable. You can break them or you can drop them on the ground, toss them around in your sink or your dishwasher. Nothing bad is going to happen to them. We like that these maintain heat, but they are not like thermically stable. So that coffee is going to cool off throughout the cupping, which is important. They're also a good size. Like I said, they're an industry standard size. And we first brought them in because we include these in a lot of our class kits. They're lightweight, they're easy to ship, and again, we're not worried about them breaking in the mail. If durability and portability aren't something that you're worried about, in most cupping labs around the world, you're going to find a cup like this or a small glass, sometimes called a Gibraltar, or like a rocks glass or a tumbler. These are also about the same size. They hold roughly 7 ounces of liquid, and you can find these on like a restaurant supply website or your local restaurant supply store. They're sold as soup cups or sometimes called bouillon cups, and you can buy them by the case. Again, if you're just building out your roastery toolkit and you need some good cupping gear, go ahead and buy 3 or 4 cases of these. That way, when it's time to cup, you're not worried about, do I have clean bowls? Is everything in the dishwasher? What do I have to do to get set up? And then as you break them, you can just replace them from that extra sort of backup box that you have unopened. These are the size that I'm very, very familiar with, and I've seen a little bit smaller and a little bit bigger. But they're really handy, they stack well, and again, they're fairly durable. I have seen these drop on the floor, even in cement floor warehouses like this one, and they do pretty well. The dose, the amount of coffee that you're going to use is going to be relative to your vessel size. So the SCA standard for cupping best practices is a ratio of 1 to 18. So the way that you'll find your coffee dose is to measure how much water fits in your cupping bowl, divide that number by 18. In this case, I'm starting with 11 grams of coffee in here. That gives me a 1 to 18 ratio in my cupping bowl when I pour my water. Speaking of dose, that brings me to another very important tool, which is your scale. Now, every coffee roaster, really any coffee professional, should have a good, high-quality digital kitchen scale or food scale. Your scale should be able to measure to the 1/10 of a gram, ideally. It could go even more accurate than that, to the 100th or the 1,000th of a gram. It should have a nice big digital display. It should also be pretty durable. And the one that we really like that you'll find on our website is this one. This is from a company called Jennings. It's the CJ4000. 4,000 refers to its maximum weight capacity, 4,000 grams. So it's actually a great kind of do-all scale if you have a small roaster, because you could weigh out 1 kilogram batches on this scale. You could weigh out cuppings. You could weigh out coffee for your pour-over, for your batch brew. I've used it to calibrate batch brewers by weighing the output of water that a batch brewer releases, and I use this at home too. This is the coffee scale that I use at home for brewing my batch brew at home, and also for baking and doing a lot of other sort of recipe building. I bake a lot of bread. Bread recipes typically are in weights, so I use my CJ a lot. This scale has a warranty. Their customer service is excellent, and it also runs on both battery and cord. You can plug it in and not have to worry about batteries. So it's really just kind of like a no-brainer. It's an affordable scale that you'll see in roasteries all over the country, probably even the world, and for really good reason. People love it. We love it. We recommend it. The scale is going to help you figure out your dose of coffee, and once you've got your coffee weighed out, you've got to grind it. I spoke about this grinder in a previous video. This is the Ode. I talked about how we liked it for a home cupping grinder or a small roastery, like maybe a small business cupping grinder, because the particle size on it was super consistent, and it was able to match, in terms of that particle distribution, some of the more commercial, sort of professional grinders that we have here in our space. Either way, a quality burr grinder is the biggest investment and probably the most important tool in your toolkit when it comes to extracting coffee and cupping coffee. You need to be able to grind consistently. You need to be able to grind without a ton of fines or boulders. So you just need a good, high-quality burr grinder. That's what it comes down to. We like the the Ode, because it's got a really small footprint. It's fairly quiet. Kind of hear it humming, and it has a cool automatic turn-off feature, which makes it nice for if you're just sort of working by yourself in the roastery. You kind of walk away, it'll turn itself off. Whenever I grind my cuppings, I sort of pour through the hopper and then catch it. Knock that grounds hopper a few times. Just clicked itself off. Smart little grinder. I'm going to do one more. Cool. The Ode also comes with a little grinds canister there, which you can use, but grinding right into your dosing cups, very, very easy and streamlined. If I was grinding a lot of different types of coffees for a bigger cupping, I would have a little purge, a little amount of that same coffee to run through the grinder first, so that I don't cross-contaminate between coffees, and I would sort of throw away that small amount of coffee. The next thing I need is a timer. Now, I know we're all wearing timers on our wrists or carrying them around in our pockets on our phones, but when I'm doing a cupping, I really try to kind of eliminate distractions, and that means I try to keep my phone away from this table. We're all programmed to look at our phones, to any screens, hundreds of times if they're in front of us. And so if my phone is on the table, I'm going to open my email. I'm going to open Instagram. I just know myself. So I just want to have a nice big display, digital timer, and I want it to be able to count up. I'm going to measure total elapsed time during this cupping. So even though the coffee only needs to brew for 4 minutes, I'm not going to set a 4-minute timer and have it count down. I'm going to count up when I start pouring my water, and then I'll be able to know how far into the cupping I am, because I want to taste this coffee as it cools down. I try to stay pretty consistent about my timing for each pass that I take. All right, now I've got my ground coffee in my cups, my scale, my timer, all of that is done. I'm done using those, and the next thing I need is a cupping spoon. I've got a nice little collection. This is my private collection of fancy cupping spoons. Now, cupping spoons are, again, just like cupping bowls, super simple. They're larger scooped spoons. They have sort of a wide bowl here to hold a good amount of coffee. I like a cupping spoon that has a good weight to it, that's comfortable to hold. Ideally, you're going to have two that are identical or similar. These are all fun ones that I've gotten from friends, other roasteries, or events that I've attended. So it's fun to collect them. They kind of become like your little your trophies, I guess. The cupping spoon, you know, it can be as simple as just a regular soup spoon. I had some of our Mill City spoons here, but I've misplaced them. So we'll use my favorite spoons here. I'm going to put those in my rinse cup, and those are going to actually start preheating when I pour my water so that they come up to the same temperature of the coffee. Any spoon will do. Again, Restaurant Supply is going to be your very good friend. We also sell some nice engraved Mill City Roasters spoons. We all know that 98% of any cup of coffee is water, and so water is our last ingredient. Water is supposed to be between 195 and 205 for a cupping, so we set our hot water towers at 201, I believe. And then I use a nice, like, thermically insulated, temperature-stable carafe. I preheat it first. I get it nice and hot, and then I empty that water out, and then I fill it up from the tower. If you're using a kettle or you're boiling water, you're going to want to go ahead and let it come up to a boil and then let it cool down for about 30 seconds to a minute so that it's not all the way up at boiling temp when you go to pour your water. That's very important. 212 is too hot for coffee. Water quality is a whole nother chapter. I could do a whole video on water quality, and we talk a lot about it in class. Ideally, your water should be filtered. It should not have any chlorine or fluoride. It should be free of odors, aromas, and it should be crystal clear, no cloudiness, no off colors. The SCA has a recommended TDS for water for coffee. I believe it's between 75 and 150 parts per million. And we use a triple filter carbon filter system here in the roastery at Mill City, so our water is about 115 parts per million. The most important thing with water and with all of these variables for cupping is just that you be consistent, right? So don't change your dose from each cupping, don't change your water quality from each cupping, don't change your grinder settings from each cupping. Just try to use everything the same way every time. That's going to help you get input that is just related to the coffee and not to the rest of your setup. So I think we've covered all of our tools of the cupping. What I want to talk about next is just the very basic steps of cupping, how things look when we're sort of in a cupping together, and if you want to cup with us, which I think is sort of the best way to learn how to taste and how to improve your sensory skills and your palate and your cupping skills, I'm going to encourage you to come to class. Right now, with the world sort of being in the situation that we're in, it's hard to get together with a very big group of people and taste the same coffees and talk about them. The SCA has some recommendations for cupping during COVID, which maybe I'll demonstrate here in a second. But really what the benefit of cupping as a group is that group calibration. It's for everyone to taste the same coffee, talk about it, and calibrate their vocabulary to find common descriptors that we all agree on. And that is the benefit of cupping with other people. As I said, we cup in class every time we host class. So whether it's the introduction class with the hands-on class kit, which is optional, or the Roasting 101 class virtually, or the Roasting 101 class here, we're gonna taste coffee together as a group, and we're gonna talk about it as a group, and we're gonna help each other fine-tune that calibration vocabulary to become better tasters of coffee. So the first step of any cupping is the dry fragrance, where we just smell the grounds. I'm going to settle those into the cup here. Just smell the ground coffee. What are you smelling? Cupping is a lot of recording our findings, our observations, and so I take very, very elaborate notes. If you follow my Instagram account, you'll see all my cupping notes that I tend to share, because sometimes I find really wild cupping notes on the table, and I like to share those with my friends. But with cupping, it's all about first impressions. Don't second guess yourself. If you smell something or you taste something, write it down, right? It's probably true for you. If it kind of came up for you and it resonated with you, then that's data that matters. So after you've taken your notes on your dry fragrance, You want to have your timer at the ready so you can pour your water. I'm going to start my timer right when I start pouring. Oop, press the wrong button. Clear that. There we go. And I'm pouring pretty quickly and trying to kind of make sure that all of the grounds get saturated. I don't want any dry pockets. Oop. Pouring all the way up to the top. I don't measure my pour of my water because I can kind of eyeball, and as long as I have consistent levels of fill from cup to cup, then I'm happy. Now my timer's counting up. I'm going to be able to see when I hit 4 minutes. I'm going to fill up my rinse cup here. And I've got my spit cup at the ready. Again, it's important not to drink, to swallow your coffee when you're cupping. For a couple reasons. You don't want to get over caffeinated. When you get too caffeinated, it gets hard to focus. We all know you get a little jittery, a little scatterbrained. But also, there's something that happens in your retronasal cavity when you swallow coffee. You kind of trap some aroma and some flavor in sort of behind your retronasal passage, and your next sip that you take will kind of taste like that previous sip. So if we're comparing coffees or we're moving from one set to another, it's going to be a little bit of a overlap there. So that's why it's important to spit out. While my coffee is brewing, I have an opportunity to do my second step, which is wet aroma, smelling the grounds as they brew. What I'm paying attention to here is how is the coffee sort of transforming now that it's brewing. I used to lead public cuppings with brand new coffee tasters. It was one of my favorite parts of my job when I worked for a cafe and then later for a roastery. And I really loved to sort of give guided questions to people because without direction, this whole process can feel a little confusing. And so I would ask people, what was your favorite cup on the table during the dry fragrance? And then, what's your favorite cup of coffee now that it's brewing? If your favorite has changed, why has it changed? What has changed about it? Usually when the coffee starts brewing, I tend to smell more sweetness, some deeper flavors, deeper notes, and that sort of thing. With a bigger set, with a big table full of coffees, we might just take the whole 4 minutes to go back around and do all of our wet aroma on every cup. And take our notes, but with just one set like we're doing today, we have some time to chill. Very important not to bump the table or disrupt the bowls right now because this crust that is formed, this coffee sort of raft that's floating on top of the bowl, we don't want that to crack. In another minute, when we hit 4 minutes, we're going to break the cups and we're actually going to stop the brew process altogether by just pushing that crust of coffee from the front to the back of the bowl. The grounds are going to sort of sink and settle down, and then the coffee will start cooling for tasting. But if we disrupt the cups too much now, then that'll happen prematurely. If you're ever cupping and you notice that your grounds don't float and you don't have this sort of raft of coffee up top, a couple reasons why that might be happening. Your coffee could be a little old. Sometimes if coffee is aged out, it's off-gassed so much that it's not going to form that nice crust. Or your roast might be very, very light. I've cupped a lot of coffees where a crust doesn't form because the coffee was just so light that it didn't have a lot of gas in it. And that's fine. If that happens, just kind of continue on, write it in your notes, did not form crust, and you can still get a lot of information from that coffee. So we're just about ready to break. I'm going to take one of my preheated spoons, and as I go down to break the cup, I'm going to smell the aromas that come off of it as I break. It looks like this. And I rinse in between each cup. There we go. Now, I always kind of push back and forth 3 times. In a barista competition, the protocol for tasting espresso is to stir your espresso 3 times. We always tell judges, row, row, row your boat. So that's something that I think about whenever I'm at the cupping table. But the point is to really just make sure that this crust is fully broken. Now, all that's left to do is clean the cups. You can see here in the bowls, we've got a huge sort of skin of bubbles, coffee grounds, some chaff. I don't want to taste any of that. I want to taste the coffee. So I'm going to take my spit cup, place it in front of the bowl, and then with my clean spoons, I'm going to use this fancy 2-spoon method for cleaning my cups. We're going to stack the spoons one on top of the other, starting at the back of the bowl with the spoons stacked, sort of go in, and then as we come forward, the spoons separate, kind of butterfly out, and then as they come to the front of the cup, they stack again. And then that's all the bubbles and stuff can go in my spit cup, rinse my spoons, and go again. Now some people just skim with 1 spoon. That's totally okay. The action is kind of still the same. You're just sort of skimming all that stuff off. Clean. And you can go back and do like a little touch up if you miss anything. Make sure that you've gotten all that stuff off the top, because you just really don't want to be tasting that stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we have some time to wait here because we really want to let this coffee cool down. I don't want to taste coffee that's super, super hot, because it's hard to taste things when they're super, super hot. So I don't really start tasting my coffee until about 8 or 9 minutes. Right now we're only at 6 minutes. So one last step that I like to do during a cupping is refresh my rinse water, because when I start tasting, I want to have really, really fresh, clean rinse water. And while we're waiting for one other thing, I'll mention another important tool that kind of doesn't have to do with the cupping at all, but really helps with setup and takedown, and that is a plastic tray and a good sort of fine mesh filter or sieve. One of these. The tray is going to help you carry cups to and from the sink, to and from the grinder, around the table. The tray is your best friend. Don't try to juggle a bunch of bowls and cups, especially if they have water, coffee grounds in them. You're going to make a mess. The tray is awesome. We've got a lot of trays on hand. When I worked in a roastery with a really big cupping lab, we had a big, tall stack of those like takeout trays that you get from like almost like a drive-in restaurant. And those were awesome. We would stack them. We would use them to set up big cuppings. They just come in handy for a ton of stuff. The strainer, it is going to help a lot with cleanup. You don't want a lot of coffee grounds in your sink. And so at the end of this cupping, you can just stir your bowls up to sort of loosen up the grounds that are at the bottom, and then drop it through the strainer. This can go right into your sink, or in our case, it's just going into a bucket. And then you've got just coffee on the bottom, and then all your grounds are held nice and safe in your strainer. That makes it super easy to clean up. So when it comes time to start tasting, this is where the sort of infamous slurp comes in. Now the reason that we slurp during a cupping is not just to sound cool, although some people would argue that it's an important rite of passage to learn how to get a really strong, loud slurp. The reason is that we want to aspirate the coffee across our palate. We want to really send a lot of aroma up into our nose, into our olfactory memory or nerve bundle up there, which is going to activate our sense memories, pull up all of the descriptors that we're familiar with from anything that we've ever tasted, eaten, or drank, or smelled before. It's also going to kind of spray the coffee across our palate. We have different receptors for flavor sort of spread across our palate. Even the roof of our mouth and parts of our throat have those receptors. So we want to hit them so we can get as much information as we can. And it also helps kind of cool the coffee down a little bit as it hits our mouth. So you want to take a good amount, but not too much so that you can't sort of slurp at once. For me, that looks like almost like a quarter or like a little silver dollar amount. And I slurp it, I sort of let it sit on my palate for just a moment, and then I spit it out. Rinse my spoon and go to the next one. It tastes like hot chocolate. I don't know what this coffee is. I think it's a Papua New Guinea. After that first pass, you've got an initial impression. And I talk more in class about how I'm taking my notes for this cupping or for any cupping, what I'm paying attention to during my first, second, and third pass, and what attributes of coffee we're actually evaluating when we're cupping, whether it's sweetness, acidity, balance, clarity, uniformity, what all those things mean. We get into that a little bit deeper in class. But I like to space out my waves by about 2 or 3 minutes usually, so that I can taste the coffee at distinctly different temperatures. So that first sip I took at 9 minutes. I'm going to kind of wait a little bit, maybe take some notes, and go in again at 11 minutes. Now I'm drinking right off my spoon, which is, the old way. That's a very, very common way to cup. If I were doing this cupping with our team here at Mill City, our sensory team, we would be doing the SCA COVID practice for cupping. And that just means that we're each going to have our own individual tasting cup, and our spoons are never going to touch our mouths, and our cups are never going to touch our spoons. So we don't have any cross-contamination. What that looks like is I will a lot of times take some hot water from the rinse cup and sort of preheat my bowl a little bit. That kind of helps so that temperature doesn't get sucked out by my cupping bowl. Pour that into my spit cup. And now I can take a small sample into my bowl and slurp just the same. Now you can see in this method, the spoon is going into the cupping bowl. But the only thing that I'm drinking out of is my own personal cup. And everyone else that I cup with is not coming into contact with anything else that's really even come close to my face. So that's a pretty safe and sanitary way to cup. I actually have been practicing this process for many, many years because, again, when I led public cuppings with groups of people who were new to coffee, the idea of all of us putting our spoon in our mouth and then on the cupping bowls, it kind of grossed people out. So I always gave people this as an option, and people took me up on it all the time. So I don't think this is too bizarre for really, well practiced cuppers, for people who have been cupping just off the spoon for a long time. This takes a little bit to get used to. It can feel a little clumsy to have this many things in your hand. And all of us have at one point either spit into our tasting cup or tried to slurp out of our spit cup. It's a mistake that maybe needs to be made, and then we don't have to make it ever again. But I promise that with practice, it gets a lot easier. So as we approach 12 and a half minutes, I might be coming up on my final pass. Thinking about how that coffee is changing as it's cooled, making my final notes. Maybe my last notes are about my tactile experience, like mouthfeel, finish, aftertaste, the coffee's body. And it's usually only after we're done cupping that we share our notes with each other. Now, if you're learning to cup and you're with a group of people and you guys are all trying to get better at tasting, I really encourage a lot of discussion at the table while you taste. But if you're in a more evaluatory process, or you're making decisions about purchasing, profiling, or designing a roast profile for a new coffee, I would say probably be quiet so you don't influence other people's opinion or feelings about the coffee. We're really easily influenced, especially when it comes to sensory ideas. So if I say, oh, this cup is so sweet, everyone else is really going to perceive that as being very sweet. If I make a really gross face when I taste something and I go, oh, like even if I don't say anything, then everyone else is going to kind of come to this cup with a little bit of hesitance, be a little bit nervous, and then they're probably also going to write some lower quality notes because they saw that I had a negative reaction to it. One of the cardinal rules of cupping is to pay attention to where your spit cup is. Never have it be in danger of being tipped over or grabbed by everyone else. There are cupping tables where you're not allowed to put your spit cup down, and I think that there's a really good reason for that. The only rule that I have is that your spoon never goes into your spit cup, which I think makes sense. That's pretty gross. Sometimes you'll see me rest it on top right like that. Sometimes you'll see me put it back in the rinse water. A lot of times, I'll just throw it in my back pocket until I'm ready to use it again. I hope this video is helpful. We get a lot of questions about cupping, and we ask a lot of questions about cupping. When people come to us and ask, why isn't my coffee roasting well? What's wrong with my coffee? What's wrong with this profile? The first thing we ask is, what does it taste like? And we don't mean, what did it taste like when you were drinking it in the car, out of your thermal carafe? We don't mean, what did it taste like when you were having your eggs and bacon in the morning? What did it taste like on the cupping table? Even if you're new to this and you feel like you're not a good taster and you have a hard time getting good notes, if you do this every week and you take some notes, even if they're just smiley faces and stars or sad faces or bunny rabbits, those notes are going to mean something to you. And over time, you'll be able to notice similarities and patterns with the coffees that you like, the coffees that you don't like, and then how they were roasted and what was happening at the roaster that was working for them or not working for them. How often do you cup in your space? What do you use to cup? Do you like to cup with other people? Do you like to cup by yourself? Do you have music that helps you cup? We want to hear about that. Leave some comments about your own cupping procedure. Feel free to ask questions. As always, you can call or email us if you want to learn more about any of these things. And a lot of these tools are on our website right now. Make sure you're cupping, come to class, and cup with us, and have a great time. Thanks for watching.